They said the storm would bury anything foolish enough to cross the pass that night, but no one said it might force two enemies to share the same fire for 3 days. The wind came first, low and distant, like something breathing beneath the mountains. Then it rose into a howl that swallowed the sky and turned the world white in less than an hour. Ayanna Red Willow had seen storms before, had walked through snow that reached her knees and wind that cut like knives, but this was different. This storm had weight to it, a presence that pressed against her chest with every breath, making each step forward feel like she was walking into something alive. Her horse fought beneath her, hooves slipping on frozen stone, nostrils flaring with panic as the trail disappeared under drifting snow. Somewhere ahead, beyond the ridge, there was a healer with the herbs she needed, and somewhere behind her, miles away, her younger brother lay wrapped in blankets, his skin burning with fever that would not break. She tightened her grip on the reins, the red thread around her wrist catching against the leather, a small reminder of the boy who had tied it there with shaking hands. 3 days, the old woman had said before she left. If you don't return in 3 days, he won't see the 4th. The memory pushed her forward even as the wind shoved her back. Then the mountain answered with silence, a sudden drop in sound that felt wrong, too still, too empty. Her horse stopped, its ears pinned forward. Ayanna followed its gaze and saw nothing but white, until the ground beneath them shifted. The snow gave way without warning, a soft collapse that turned solid earth into open air. The horse screamed, a sharp, terrified sound, and then they were falling. Cold swallowed everything. The world spun. Snow filled her mouth, her lungs, her thoughts. She tried to reach for the reins, for anything, but there was only weight and darkness and the distant echo of wind above. When she opened her eyes again, the storm was still there, but it was quieter now, muffled, like she was hearing it from underground. Firelight flickered against rough wooden walls. The smell of smoke and damp wool filled the air. Her body felt heavy, her limbs slow, as if they no longer belonged to her. She moved her hand and felt cloth wrapped tight around her wrist, clean, deliberate. Not her work, not her people's work. Her breath caught. Across the small cabin, near a door half buried in snow, a man stood with his back to her. Tall, still, watching the storm like it had something to say to him. Ayanna's eyes sharpened, instinct cutting through the fog of exhaustion. Her knife lay on a table between them, close enough to see, far enough to matter. The man didn't reach for it, didn't turn. Storm took your horse, he said, his voice low, steady, carrying no strain despite the wind pressing against the walls. Fever almost took you. Something in the way he spoke made her stomach tighten. Not the words, the calm behind them. She pushed herself up, every muscle protesting, her gaze never leaving his silhouette. Snow slid from his coat onto the floor as he shifted slightly, just enough for the firelight to catch his face. And in that brief flicker, recognition struck her like a second fall. Caleb Rourke. The name moved through her mind before she could stop it. The man the traders whispered about. The man her people warned their children about. The one who had walked into Apache land and walked out alone. Her fingers curled, reaching slowly, carefully, toward the knife. He didn't move. Didn't even look at her. You can take it, he said quietly, if it makes you feel safer. The wind slammed against the cabin, rattling the frame, as if the mountain itself was listening. Ayanna's hand closed around the knife, the familiar weight grounding her, but the unease didn't fade. Because men like Caleb Rourke didn't save strangers in storms. And they didn't sit with their backs, turned to someone who might decide to end them before sunrise. Something was wrong. And whatever it was, the storm outside suddenly felt like the smaller danger. The knife felt heavier than she remembered, not because of its weight, but because of the man standing 10 feet away who did not fear it, and that alone made Ayanna uneasy in a way the storm never could. She pushed herself higher against the rough plank wall, forcing strength back into her arms while keeping the blade low and ready, her eyes never leaving Caleb Rourke as he stood at the door like a post driven into the earth. Snow pressed through the cracks in slow, steady lines, dusting his shoulders, and still he did not move to brush it away. Men who feared death fidgeted. Men who carried guilt spoke too much. This one didn't either. Why am I alive? She asked, her voice steady now, cutting through the quiet between gusts. Caleb shifted slightly, enough for the firelight to catch the edge of his jaw, the faint shadow of stubble, the kind of face that did not ask for trust but did not hide from judgment either. "Because I found you before the cold did," he said. No pride. No explanation beyond that. Ayanna narrowed her eyes. "Men like you do not help women like me." The words hung in the cabin, heavier than the storm outside. For the first time, Caleb turned his head just enough for her to see one eye, gray and sharp, but tired in a way that did not belong to the night. "Men like me," he repeated quietly, as if testing the weight of it, then looked back to the door. "That depends on who is telling the story." The wind surged again, rattling the frame hard enough to make the ceiling groan. Ayanna's grip tightened on the knife, but her gaze flicked, just for a moment, to the corner of the cabin where something hung near the fire. A small leather pouch, darkened with age, its stitching familiar in a way that made her chest tighten before she understood why. She forced her eyes back to him. "You know who I am," she said. It was not a question. He did not answer right away. Instead, he stepped away from the door, slow, deliberate, giving her space rather than closing it, and moved to the table where her knife had been. He did not reach for it. He only set down a tin cup filled with steaming water, the faint scent of pine rising with the heat. "You were heading north," he said. "No one goes north in a storm like this unless they have a reason that outweighs fear." He glanced at her wrist then, at the red thread tied there, and something in his expression shifted. Not softer, but deeper, like recognition without words. 3 days, he added. The air left her lungs in a slow, controlled breath. He knew. Not everything, but enough. That was worse. "You followed me," she said, suspicion rising again, sharper now because it had somewhere to land. Caleb shook his head once. "The storm followed you. I found what it left behind." His gaze drifted to the corner again, to a saddle blanket half buried in snow near the wall, the edge of a hoof print frozen into the floor where the horse had been dragged in before being let out again. Evidence, simple and undeniable. Ayanna's jaw tightened. She had no ground to accuse him from, and he knew it. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the low crackle of fire and the distant roar of wind pressing against the mountain. Then, without warning, a deep groan rolled through the cabin as the weight of snow shifted above them. The ceiling dipped, just an inch, but enough to send a thin line of powder drifting down. Caleb moved fast then, not toward her, but toward the center beam, bracing his shoulder beneath it, testing the strain like a man who had done this before. "If that goes," he said, voice calm but firm, "the storm will not need to finish the job." Ayanna hesitated, the knife still in her hand, the old stories fighting with the truth in front of her. Then the beam creaked again, louder this time, and instinct overrode doubt. She stepped forward, placing her free hand against the wood beside him, feeling the tremor run through it like a warning. For a moment, neither spoke. Two enemies, shoulder to shoulder, holding up the same roof while the storm tried to take it. And in that moment, Ayanna realized something she did not want to admit. The man she had been taught to fear was the only reason she was still breathing. And that truth was far more dangerous than the storm outside. The beam held, but just barely, and Ayanna could feel the strain traveling through the wood into her palm like a warning that would not speak twice, the kind of warning the mountains gave before they decided something no longer belonged where it stood. Caleb adjusted his stance beside her, shifting his weight in slow, measured increments, not rushing, not panicking, as if the storm itself had taught him patience over years she could not see. "Easy," he said, not to her but to the timber above them, like a man calming a restless animal. The ceiling groaned again, then settled, just enough for the pressure to ease by a fraction. Ayanna did not step back. Not yet. Her breath came steady now, controlled, her shoulders still pressed close enough to his that she could feel the heat from his body through the cold air. It unsettled her more than the wind. "You have done this before," she said quietly. Caleb did not look at her. "Cabin gets buried every winter," he replied. "Snow does not care who built the roof." Another simple answer. Another piece of a man who refused to explain himself beyond what was necessary. When the beam finally stopped shifting, he eased his shoulder away first, stepping back without turning his back on her, always aware, always leaving her space to move if she chose. Ayanna lowered her hand slowly, the knife still in her grip, but her attention drifted again to the leather pouch hanging near the fire. She could see it clearer now. The stitching was not just familiar. It was precise, deliberate, done in a pattern her people used for healing kits, not trade goods. Her chest tightened, a memory pressing at the edges of her mind without fully forming. "That pouch," she said, her voice sharper now, cutting through the quiet. "Where did you get it?" Caleb followed her gaze, and for the first time since she had woken, something in his expression shifted in a way he did not hide fast enough. Not fear, not guilt, something older. "It was given," he said after a moment. Ayanna took a step forward before she realized she had moved, the knife lowering without her noticing. "By who?" The storm slammed against the cabin again, as if trying to drown out the answer. Caleb reached up, unhooked the pouch from its nail, and held it out, not tossing it, not forcing it into her hands, just offering it across the space between them. "Look for yourself," he said. She hesitated only a second before taking it. The leather was worn but cared for, the surface softened by years of use. Her fingers moved over the stitching, tracing the pattern she knew better than her own reflection. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were dried herbs, carefully preserved despite the cold, and beneath them, something small and hard. Ayanna's breath caught as she pulled it free. A bead, turquoise, worn smooth, wrapped in thin silver wire. Her mother's work, her mother's design. The world narrowed around that single piece, the firelight catching in its surface like a memory refusing to stay buried. She lifted her eyes slowly, the knife now forgotten at her side. "This was made by my family," she said, her voice no longer steady. Caleb nodded once. "I know." The words landed heavier than anything he had said before. Ayanna's grip tightened on the bead, her thoughts racing, connecting pieces she had been taught to keep separate. "How?" she demanded, a quiet urgency rising beneath the question. Caleb looked at the fire, not at her, as if the answer lived somewhere in the flames. "A woman gave it to me," he said. "Said it would remind me that not every debt needs to be repaid with blood." He paused, then added, softer. "She said her people would understand that better than mine ever did." The cabin fell silent except for the storm, but the sound felt distant now, like it belonged to another world. Ayanna stared at him, at the man she had been raised to fear, holding a piece of her family's past like it was something worth protecting. The stories did not match the man, and for the first time since the storm began, she did not know which one to believe. The bead felt warm in Ayanna's hand, warmer than the fire should have allowed, as if it carried a memory that refused to fade with time. And for a moment she forgot the storm, forgot the cabin, forgot the man standing a few feet away who had no right to be holding a piece of her past. Her fingers tightened around it, the silver wire pressing into her skin, grounding her in something real while everything else began to shift. "Describe her," she said, her voice quieter now, but heavier, each word placed with care. Caleb did not answer right away. He moved to the fire, instead, adding a small piece of wood, watching the flame catch before he spoke, like he needed the time to choose what to say and what to leave buried. "She was older," he said finally. Moved slow, but her eyes did not miss anything. Carried herself like the land belonged to her, even when she stood on ground that would not claim her. Ayanna's breath stilled. The image was too clear, too precise. "What did she call herself?" Ayanna pressed. Caleb shook his head slightly. "She did not," he said. "But she told me what I needed to hear, not what I wanted." The wind outside shifted direction, driving snow harder against the cabin walls, a steady, relentless pressure that made the structure groan again. Ayanna barely heard it now. Her mind had already stepped somewhere else, years back, to a woman who had sat by a fire and told stories of balance, of choices that did not always look like strength to those who feared them. Her mother. The realization did not come all at once. It settled slowly, like snow, quiet and undeniable. She looked at Caleb again, really looked this time, not as a threat, not as a name whispered in warning, but as a man carrying something he had not asked for. "You met her," Ayanna said. It was not a question. Caleb nodded once, the movement small but certain. "She found me," he corrected. Silence followed, but it was not the same silence as before. It was heavier, filled with things neither of them had yet said. Ayanna lowered herself slowly onto the edge of the bedroll, The exhaustion she had been holding back finally catching up to her now that her mind had something else to hold on to. The knife rested loosely in her hand, no longer aimed, no longer needed in the same way. "Why keep this?" she asked, lifting the bead slightly. "Men like you do not carry reminders of people they leave behind." Caleb's gaze shifted from the fire to her, steady, unflinching. "Because she did not leave me behind," he said. The answer came without hesitation this time, and something in it settled deeper than any explanation could have. Ayanna studied him, searching for the edges of a lie, for something that would make this easier, simpler, something that would let her place him back into the stories she understood. But there was nothing there to hold on to except the truth he was not trying to sell. The cabin creaked again as a gust hit harder than the last, sending a fine spray of snow through the cracks and into the firelight where it melted before touching the ground. Time moved differently inside that small space, stretched thin between past and present, between what she had been taught and what she was beginning to see. "If you knew her," Ayanna said slowly, "then you know what my people believe about debt." Caleb's expression did not change, but his eyes held hers a fraction longer. "I do," he said, "and I know it is not something you ask for." Ayanna let that sit between them, the weight of it settling in the same way the snow settled against the cabin walls. Outside, the storm showed no sign of breaking. Inside, something else had already begun to shift, something quieter, more dangerous than the wind. Because trust did not arrive all at once. It came in moments like this, uninvited, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore once it took root. The fire burned lower as the hours stretched, the kind of slow-burning quiet that made every small sound carry more weight than it should, and Ayanna could feel the storm pressing against the cabin like it was waiting for something inside to give before it decided to move on. She sat with the bead still in her hand, turning it between her fingers, the silver catching what little light remained, each movement pulling another memory to the surface whether she wanted it or not. Caleb had not moved far from the fire, his back resting against the wall now, one knee bent, the other leg stretched out, conserving energy in a way that spoke of long winters and harder lessons. He had not asked for the bead back. He had not asked her anything at all. That, more than anything, unsettled her. "You speak like someone who has lived with my people," she said after a long silence, her voice cutting through the crackle of the fire without force. Caleb glanced at her briefly, then back to the flames. "I listened," he said. "That is not the same thing." Ayanna studied him, weighing the difference, understanding more than she let show. Most men spoke to prove something. Few listened long enough to learn. The wind shifted again, a deeper gust that rattled the door hard enough to make the latch tremble in place. Caleb's eyes flicked to it instantly, his body straightening just enough to show he was never as still as he looked. "It will hold," he said, more to the storm than to her. "It has before." Ayanna followed his gaze, then back to him. "And if it does not?" she asked quietly. Caleb reached over, picking up a small piece of wood and placing it onto the fire with careful precision. "Then we find out what we are made of," he replied. There was no challenge in his voice, no bravado, only a statement that had already been tested more times than he cared to count. Ayanna let out a slow breath, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than exhaustion. She shifted slightly, wincing as the cold still clung to her bones despite the fire. "You said she found you," Ayanna said, bringing the conversation back to where it mattered. "Why?" Caleb did not answer right away. He rubbed his hands together slowly, warming them, buying time or choosing his words. She could not tell which. "Because I was heading in the wrong direction," he said at last. And she knew it. Ayanna tilted her head slightly, studying him. "And you listened," she pressed. Caleb gave a faint, almost invisible shake of his head. "Not at first," he admitted. "Men like me do not change direction because someone tells them to." Ayanna almost smiled at that, but the expression never fully formed. "Then what made you?" she asked. Caleb's gaze drifted past her, not to the cabin, not to the storm, but somewhere further back, somewhere only he could see. "She did not argue," he said quietly. "She did not try to prove me wrong. She just asked me one question." Ayanna leaned forward slightly despite herself. "What question?" Caleb looked at her then, really looked at her, and for the first time there was something in his eyes that matched the weight she felt in her chest. "She asked me who would pay the price for the path I chose," he said. The words settled between them, heavy, undeniable. Ayana felt the bead tighten in her grip again, the red thread around her wrist brushing against it like two pieces of the same story meeting in the middle. Outside, the storm howled louder, as if it did not like the answer. Inside, the fire flickered, casting shadows that moved along the walls like silent witnesses. And now, Ayana said slowly, her voice softer than before, "Do you know the answer?" Caleb held her gaze for a moment longer, then looked down at his hands, the scars, the lines, the weight of everything he had carried into that cabin. "I am still learning," he said. And something about that answer, simple as it was, felt more honest than anything else he could have given. Ayana leaned back against the wall, the knife resting loosely at her side now, no longer a barrier, just a habit she had not yet let go. The storm had not eased. The danger had not passed. But the man across from her was no longer a stranger shaped by stories alone. And that change, quiet and unspoken, was already beginning to matter more than the wind outside. The night deepened without warning, the kind of quiet shift where the fire burned lower and the cold pressed closer. And Ayana realized that the storm outside had not weakened at all. It had simply grown more patient. The wind no longer struck the cabin in wild bursts, but moved in long, steady pushes, like something testing every inch of the walls for weakness. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, though the warmth felt thin against the cold that had settled into her bones hours ago. Across the room, Caleb had not slept. His eyes remained half-lidded, but she could tell he was listening, not to the storm alone, but to something deeper beneath it. "You hear that?" he said quietly, his voice barely rising above the fire. Ayana stilled. At first, there was nothing but wind. Then, beneath it, something else. A low shifting sound, subtle, like snow moving where it should not. Her gaze lifted toward the ceiling without thinking. "The weight is changing," she said. Caleb nodded once. "Drift is building on the north side," he replied. "If it slides, it will not stop at the wall." The words settled into her chest with a different kind of cold. She had crossed mountains before. She knew what a moving wall of snow could do without needing it spoken aloud. Ayana pushed herself up, ignoring the pull of fatigue in her muscles, and stepped closer to the small window, brushing aside the frost just enough to see outside. There was nothing. Only white. No sky. No ground. Just a world erased. "How long?" she asked. Caleb stood slowly, his movements deliberate, conserving strength even now. He joined her at the window, but did not look out. He looked at the edges, at the way the frost had formed, at the faint tremor in the wood frame. "Not long," he said. "Maybe minutes. Maybe less." The calm in his voice did not comfort her. It sharpened everything. Ayana turned from the window, scanning the cabin with new eyes, seeing not shelter but structure, not safety but something that could fail. "What do we do?" she asked. Caleb did not hesitate. "We change where the weight lands," he said. He moved quickly now, pulling a long wooden pole from beside the door, the kind used to clear snow from the roof. He handed her a shorter one without explanation. "We strike the drift before it decides for us," he added. Ayana took the pole, her grip firm despite the tremor that had nothing to do with cold. They moved together to the door. Caleb forced it open against the pressure of snow, the wind rushing in immediately, sharp and biting, stealing heat in seconds. Ayana stepped out beside him, the storm swallowing them both in white. The world was reduced to 10 feet of visibility, maybe less, the ground uneven beneath her boots as snow shifted with each step. Caleb led without looking back, circling to the north side of the cabin where the drift had piled high against the wall, rising like a frozen wave ready to fall. "Here," he called, his voice steady despite the wind. He drove the pole into the packed snow, breaking the surface layer with controlled strikes, not wild, not frantic. Ayana followed, matching his rhythm, her movements precise, focused, each strike sending small cascades of snow sliding away from the wall. The work was hard, the air thin and sharp, each breath burning as it filled her lungs. But she did not stop, not because she trusted him fully, not yet, but because she understood the truth in his actions. He was not fighting the storm. He was working with it, guiding it, shaping where it would fall. Minutes stretched, or maybe seconds, time lost in the rhythm of movement and sound. Then it happened. A deeper shift, a low rumble beneath their feet that grew just enough to feel, not hear. Caleb stopped instantly, his hand lifting in a silent command. Back, he said. They moved together without question, stepping away from the wall as a section of the drift gave way, sliding down in a controlled collapse that spread out instead of crashing inward. Snow settled. The pressure eased. The cabin still stood. Ayanna lowered her pole slowly, her breath heavy, her heart steady but strong in her chest. Caleb glanced at her, just once, a brief meeting of eyes in the storm. No words. None needed. Because in that moment, she understood something clearly for the first time since she woke in that cabin. This man did not survive because he was lucky. He survived because he knew when to act and when to stand still. And for reasons she could not yet explain, she had followed him without hesitation. The snow settled into a strange kind of silence after the drift gave way. Not calm, not safe, but quieter, like the storm had taken a breath instead of ending. And Ayanna stood there for a moment longer than she needed to, the cold biting through her sleeves, her grip still tight around the wooden pole, as if letting go might change what had just happened. Caleb turned first, already moving back toward the cabin, his pace steady, not rushed, as if he trusted the mountain to hold now that he had asked it to. Ayanna followed without thinking, her steps falling into rhythm behind his, the wind pushing against her back instead of her chest this time, guiding her forward. Inside, the door shut hard against the storm, sealing them again in the small space where the fire still fought to stay alive. Caleb moved straight to it, adding more wood, adjusting the coals with careful precision until the flame grew stronger, warmer, pushing the cold back inch by inch. Ayanna leaned the pole against the wall, her hands slower now, her breath still catching up to her body. You knew exactly where it would fall, she said, not as an accusation, not even as a question, but as something she needed to understand. Caleb sat back on his heels near the fire, rubbing his hands together, the skin reddened from cold but steady. Snow follows shape, he replied. Wind decides where it gathers, but weight decides where it breaks. He looked up at her briefly. You just have to read it before it speaks. Ayanna absorbed that, the simplicity of it, the quiet knowledge behind the words. It was not so different from what her people believed about the land, about listening before acting, about knowing when silence carried more truth than sound. She moved closer to the fire, lowering herself slowly, the warmth finally beginning to reach her fingers again. The bead still rested in her palm, forgotten during the storm, but not lost. She turned it once, watching the light catch in the turquoise. My mother used to say something like that, she said quietly. Caleb did not respond immediately. He reached for the tin cup again, refilled it, and set it within her reach without looking at her. Sounds like she knew more than most, he said. Ayanna studied him over the rim of the cup as she took a careful sip, the heat spreading through her chest in a slow, steady line. She did, she answered. The silence that followed was different now. Not empty, not tense. It held something that had not been there before, something built in the moments outside where words had not mattered. The fire crackled, the cabin creaked, and the storm continued its endless movement beyond the walls. But inside, the space between them had shifted in a way neither of them named. Ayanna set the cup down and leaned back slightly, her gaze drifting to the door, to the white light that seeped through the edges. When the storm ends, she said, her voice softer now, more measured. I have to leave immediately. Caleb nodded once, as if he had already known. North, he said, to the healer. Ayanna's eyes sharpened again, not with suspicion this time, but with something closer to recognition. You listen more than you speak, she said. Caleb gave the faintest hint of a smile, barely there, gone almost as soon as it appeared. It keeps me alive, he replied. Ayanna let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. It might save someone else too, she said, almost to herself. The words lingered in the air, fragile but real. Outside, the storm shifted again, a long, low sound rolling through the mountains like something turning over in its sleep. Inside, the fire held steady. And for the first time since she had woken in that cabin, Ayanna did not feel like she was waiting for something to go wrong. She felt like she was standing in the middle of something that was already changing, something she could not yet see the end of, but could no longer ignore. The fire had settled into a steady glow, low but strong, the kind that did not demand attention but quietly held the darkness back. And Ayanna found herself watching it longer than she intended, not because of the warmth, but because it gave her something simple to focus on while everything else around her continued to shift in ways she did not yet understand. Caleb had moved again, not far, just enough to sit closer to the door, his position chosen without thought, or maybe with too much of it, always between her and whatever might come through that frame of wood and snow. He rested one arm across his knee, the other loose at his side, but there was nothing relaxed about him. Even still, he was listening. Always listening. "You never sleep," Ayanna said after a while, her voice quiet but clear in the small space. Caleb did not look at her when he answered. "I do," he said, "just not when the mountain is still deciding." Ayanna followed his gaze to the door again, to the faint line where snow pressed against it from the outside, sealing them in, cutting them off from everything beyond a few yards of white. "You speak like it has a will," she said. Caleb gave a small breath that might have been a quiet laugh, though it carried no humor. "It does not need one," he replied. "It just does what it has always done. That is enough." Ayanna considered that, turning the bead once more between her fingers. The red thread brushed against it again, the two pieces touching in a way that felt almost intentional now, like something trying to connect past and present without asking permission. "My people would say the same," she said softly. Caleb nodded once, as if that confirmed something he already knew. Silence returned, but it was not empty. It held the weight of everything that had been said and everything that had not. The fire cracked. The cabin shifted slightly as the wind leaned against it again. Then, faintly, something else reached through the storm. Ayanna's head lifted instantly. Caleb was already still, not frozen, focused. The sound came again, distant but distinct, a rhythm that did not belong to wind or falling snow. Ayanna's grip tightened around the bead without thinking. "You hear it," she said. Caleb did not answer. He stood slowly, moving toward the door, each step placed with care, his attention narrowing to the space beyond the wood. The sound came a third time. Softer now, but clearer. Not close. Not yet. But real. Ayanna rose to her feet, the fatigue gone in an instant, replaced by something sharper. "Riders," she said under her breath. Caleb reached the door, but did not open it. Instead, he pressed his hand flat against the wood, feeling, listening through it the way he had listened to the beam, to the drift, to the storm itself. "Too far to see," he said quietly, "but close enough to matter." Ayanna's eyes narrowed, her mind already moving ahead, measuring distance, time, what remained of it. "No one should be riding in this," she said. Caleb's jaw tightened just slightly, the only sign that the thought had already crossed his mind. "No one who values their life," he agreed. The implications settled between them without needing to be spoken. Ayanna stepped closer, her voice lower now, more focused. "If they are out there, they are not lost." Caleb finally turned to look at her, and in that moment, the quiet understanding between them sharpened into something else entirely. "No," he said. "They are looking." The fire flickered behind them, casting long shadows across the cabin walls, while outside, the storm continued its endless movement, hiding whatever approached just beyond sight. And for the first time since the snow had begun to fall, the danger no longer felt like something distant or natural or inevitable. It felt like it had a direction, and it was coming straight toward them. The sound did not come again right away, and that was worse than hearing it clearly, because silence in a storm like this could mean distance, or it could mean something moving with care, and Ayanna felt her chest tighten as she stepped closer to Caleb, her senses stretching outward, trying to read what the wind refused to show. Caleb remained by the door, his hand still resting against the wood, his head tilted slightly, as if the mountain itself was speaking through it. "They are slowing," he said after a moment. Ayanna frowned. "Because of the storm," she answered instinctively. Caleb shook his head once. "No," he said quietly. "Because they are searching." The difference settled in her stomach like a stone. She turned toward the small window again, brushing aside the frost with the edge of her sleeve, but the world beyond remained nothing but shifting white, a curtain that revealed nothing and hid everything. "How many?" she asked. Caleb listened again, longer this time, his breathing steady, controlled. "More than one," he said. "Not many. 3, maybe 4. Ayanna's grip tightened around the bead in her hand, the red thread pressing against her wrist, as if reminding her of the time she did not have. "They will not find us in this," she said, though the words carried less certainty than she wanted. Caleb stepped away from the door then, turning to face her fully, his expression calm but focused in a way that made her listen even before he spoke. "They will," he said, "if they know what they are looking for." Ayanna held his gaze, searching for what he was not saying. "And do they?" she asked. Caleb did not answer directly. Instead, he crossed the cabin in 2 steps and reached for a thick blanket hanging near the wall, pulling it free and tossing it toward her. "Cover the firelight," he said. "Keep it low. No smoke through the cracks." Ayanna caught the blanket without question, moving to the fire and draping part of it across the opening above, leaving just enough space for the flame to breathe, but not enough to be seen from outside. The cabin dimmed immediately, shadows deepening along the walls, the warmth still there, but hidden now, like everything else. "You think they are hunting you," she said, turning back to him. Caleb met her eyes for a brief second, then looked past her, toward the pouch, the bead, the pieces of her world now sitting in his. "I think they are hunting something," he said carefully, "and I do not know if it is me." The words lingered, pulling her thoughts in a direction she had not considered. Ayanna's eyes sharpened again, not with fear, but with clarity. "They could be following me," she said. Caleb did not dismiss it. "You were traveling alone," he said. "In a storm no one else would choose. That draws attention." Ayanna nodded slowly, her mind moving through possibilities, measuring what she had done, who might have seen, what might have been left behind. The storm had erased most tracks, but not all. Not always. The sound came again then, closer this time, faint but unmistakable, the rhythm of hooves striking uneven ground, careful, deliberate, closing distance one step at a time. Ayanna felt her heartbeat steady instead of quicken, the focus settling over her like a second layer of skin. "If they find this cabin," she said, her voice low, precise, "they will not believe what they see." Caleb's gaze returned to her, holding for a fraction longer than before. "No," he agreed. "They will believe the story they came with." Ayanna let out a slow breath, the bead still in her hand, the red thread brushing against it again as if tying something unseen between them. "Then we decide what story they leave with," she said. The fire flickered softly behind the blanket, the storm whispered against the walls, and outside, the riders moved closer through a world that refused to reveal them. Inside, 2 people who should have never stood on the same side of anything now shared the same silence, the same understanding, and the same decision that neither of them spoke aloud but both had already made. The sound of hooves came again, closer now, no longer. Swallowed completely by the wind, and Ayanna felt the shift in the air before anything else changed, the kind of shift that told her the moment of waiting was ending whether they were ready or not. Caleb moved first, not toward the door, not toward the window, but toward the center of the cabin, his eyes scanning everything with a quiet precision that missed nothing. "They will circle before they stop," he said, his voice low, controlled, as if speaking too loudly might give the storm something else to carry. Ayanna nodded once, already understanding the pattern. Riders who hunted did not ride straight into what they could not see. They tested. They listened. They closed the space slowly until there was nowhere left to go. "How long?" she asked. Caleb tilted his head slightly, listening again, measuring distance through sound alone. "Minutes," he said. "Less if they are certain." Ayanna's gaze dropped briefly to the bead in her hand, then to the red thread at her wrist. 3 days. That was all she had been given, and the storm had already taken most of it. She closed her fingers around both, then looked back up, her focus sharp now, settled. "Then we do not wait for them to decide," she said. Caleb's eyes met hers, holding for a brief moment, something unspoken passing between them, not agreement, not command, but recognition. "No," he said, "we do not." He crossed to the far wall and reached for a small satchel, pulling it down and opening it with practiced hands. Inside were simple things. A coil of rope, a piece of cloth, a small tin, nothing that looked like a weapon, everything that looked like survival. He handed her the cloth first. "Wrap your wrist," he said. "Hide the thread." Ayanna hesitated for only a second before doing as he said, winding the cloth around her wrist, covering the red line that marked who she was, not out of shame, but out of understanding. Some truths were safer unseen. Caleb watched her for a moment, then nodded once, as if confirming something to himself. "If they see you first, They will see what they expect, he said. A story they already believe. Ayanna met his gaze steadily. And if they see you? She asked. Caleb's expression did not change, but something in his eyes hardened just slightly. Then they will not need to look twice, he answered. The weight of that settled quickly, but there was no time to sit with it. The sound outside shifted again, closer now, clearer, the rhythm of hooves slowing, adjusting, moving through the storm with purpose instead of confusion. Ayanna stepped toward the door, stopping just short of it, her breath steady, her mind moving ahead of the moment. You said they are searching, she said. What happens when they find what they think they are looking for? Caleb moved to stand beside her, not in front, not behind, but level, equal in the space they now shared. Then they stopped searching, he said. Ayanna let out a slow breath, the kind that came before a choice, not after it. Good, she said quietly. The cabin creaked as another gust pressed against it, the fire flickering behind the blanket, casting shadows that shifted along the walls like silent witnesses to what was about to happen. Outside, a shape moved through the white, barely visible, then gone again, then closer the next time it appeared, the outline of a rider cutting through the storm with deliberate intent. Caleb's hand moved, not to a weapon, but to the latch on the door, resting there, waiting. Ayanna did not reach for her knife. Not yet. She stood still, her eyes fixed on the faint movement beyond the wood, her senses narrowed to the moment that was about to break open. The storm howled, the wind pushed, and the distance between inside and outside disappeared one heartbeat at a time. And in that narrow space between silence and action, both of them understood something clearly. Whatever story walked up to that door would not leave the same way it came. The knock did not come the way Ayanna expected, not loud, not demanding, but soft, almost swallowed by the wind, like whoever stood outside understood that sound carried differently in a storm like this. Caleb did not move right away. His hand remained on the latch, his body still, his attention fixed beyond the door as if he could see through wood and snow and into the intentions waiting on the other side. Ayanna stood beside him, her breath slow, her heartbeat steady, every sense drawn tight around the moment. The knock came again, slightly firmer this time, followed by a voice, low but clear enough to reach through the storm. Shelter, the man said. We are just looking for shelter. Ayanna felt the words settle in the space between her and Caleb, simple on the surface, but carrying too much weight to be taken at face value. Caleb did not answer immediately. He glanced at her once, not for permission, not for instruction, but for alignment, and she gave the smallest nod, barely visible, but enough. Caleb lifted the latch and opened the door just enough to reveal the world outside. Snow rushed in with the wind, sharp and cold, and beyond it, shapes formed slowly, 3 riders, maybe 4, their outlines blurred by the storm but their presence unmistakable. The lead rider sat tall despite the wind, his posture too controlled for a man caught off guard by weather. His eyes moved quickly, taking in the cabin, the door, Caleb, and then Ayanna, all in a single glance that lasted less than a second but revealed far more than his words had. You are a long way from anywhere to be asking for shelter, Caleb said, his voice even, giving nothing away. The rider gave a faint smile that did not reach his eyes. Storm makes men forget how far they have come, he replied. Ayanna watched him closely, the way he held the reins, the way his horse shifted beneath him, restless but trained, the way the other riders stayed slightly behind, not crowding, not speaking, but ready. These were not men lost in a storm. These were men who had chosen to be in it. We will not stay long, the rider added, his gaze returning to Ayanna for just a moment longer than necessary, just enough to wait out the worst of it. Caleb's hand rested lightly on the door, not closing it, not opening it further. There is not much space, he said. The rider shrugged slightly, as if that did not matter. We do not need much. Silence followed, stretched thin by the wind and the unspoken understanding beneath it. Ayanna stepped forward then, just enough to be seen clearly, her posture calm, her movements deliberate. The storm will pass, she said, her voice steady, carrying through the cold air. You will find better shelter if you keep moving. The rider's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in recognition of something unexpected. He studied her for a moment, longer this time, as if measuring her against something he had been told. "And what if we choose not to?" he asked. Ayana did not look away. "Then you choose to stay where you are not needed," she replied. The wind surged again, pushing snow between them, blurring the edges of everything, but not the tension that had settled firmly in place. Caleb remained still beside her, saying nothing, letting the moment unfold without forcing it. The rider exhaled slowly, his breath visible in the cold air, then glanced back at the men behind him, a silent exchange passing between them before he turned forward again. "You speak like someone who knows this land," he said to Ayana. She held his gaze without hesitation. "I speak like someone who knows when to leave," she answered. The rider's faint smile returned, sharper this time, more certain. "And yet," he said, his voice lowering just enough to carry meaning beyond the words, "you are still here." Ayana felt the weight of that settle, not as a threat, but as a test, one she could not afford to fail. "So are you," she said quietly. The storm howled between them, the fire flickered behind her, and for a long moment, no one moved, no one spoke. The balance held on something too fine to see. Then the rider shifted in his saddle, just slightly, enough to signal a choice. And whatever he decided next would decide everything that followed. The rider did not move right away, and that stillness carried more weight than any threat could have, because it meant he was deciding, measuring every word, every glance, every breath that had passed between them since the door opened. Snow gathered along the edges of his coat, the wind tugging at it without success, as if even the storm understood that this man did not bend easily. His gaze shifted once more to Ayana, slower this time, more deliberate, and there was something different in it now, something closer to recognition than suspicion. "You are not from the towns," he said quietly, not as a question, but as a conclusion drawn from everything he had seen. Ayana did not answer directly. "And you are not lost," she replied, holding his gaze with the same steady calm. The rider's faint smile deepened, but there was no warmth in it, only certainty. Behind him, one of the other riders shifted slightly in the saddle, the movement small, but enough to show that patience was wearing thin. Caleb remained beside the door, silent, his presence steady but unspoken, letting the moment stretch without forcing it to break. The rider exhaled slowly, then lifted his chin just a fraction, as if acknowledging something that had not been said aloud. "We are looking for someone," he said. The words landed clean, cutting through the storm, removing the last layer of pretense that had hung between them. Ayana felt the truth in it immediately, not just in the words, but in the way he said them, without hesitation, without apology. Caleb did not react, but Ayana could feel the shift beside her, subtle, controlled. "But there, a man," the rider continued, his eyes flicking briefly toward Caleb before returning to her. Or perhaps a story wearing a man's face. Ayana did not move, did not look at Caleb, but she felt the weight of that glance as clearly as if it had been placed in her hand. "Stories change depending on who tells them," she said, her voice even, refusing to let the moment belong to him alone. The rider tilted his head slightly, considering that. "That is true," he admitted. "But some stories leave marks that cannot be hidden." His gaze dropped then, not to her face, but to her wrist, where the cloth wrapped tightly, concealing the red thread beneath. The movement was small, almost nothing, but it told her everything she needed to know. He was not guessing. He was confirming. Ayana felt the tension settle deeper, sharper now, no longer hidden beneath words. "And what mark do you think you see?" she asked quietly. The rider's eyes lifted back to hers, the faint smile returning, more certain now. "Enough to know I am not wrong," he said. The wind surged again, pushing snow between them, blurring the edges of the moment, but not the truth that had just surfaced. Caleb shifted slightly beside her, not stepping forward, not pulling back, but adjusting in a way that aligned with her without drawing attention to it. "If you are searching for someone," Ayana said, her voice steady despite the tightening space around them, "then you should be careful what you think you have found." The rider studied her for a long second, longer than before, as if weighing not just her words, but the reason behind them. Then he glanced past her, into the dim interior of the cabin, taking in the covered fire, the limited space, the absence of anything that would make this place worth finding unless you already believed it was. "Careful," he repeated softly. "That is good advice." He shifted in his saddle again, but this time the movement was different, less testing, more decided. "We will take that advice," he said, his voice carrying just enough to reach the men behind him. For now, Ayanna did not relax. She did not move. She watched as he pulled the reins slightly, guiding his horse to turn, slow and controlled, the others following without question. No hurry, no sign of defeat, just a decision made and carried out. The storm swallowed them quickly, their shapes fading back into white until they were gone as if they had never been there. Caleb closed the door quietly, sealing the cabin once more, the wind pressing against it immediately, as if trying to reclaim what had just been held back. Neither of them spoke for a moment. The fire flickered behind the blanket, the cabin creaked, and the silence returned, but it was no longer the same. Because both of them knew something now that they had not known before. The riders had not been turned away. They had simply chosen to leave. And that meant one thing. They would be back. The silence after the riders vanished did not feel like safety. It felt like the moment after a door closes when you know it will open again, just not when or how. And Ayanna stood where she was for a long breath, listening not for the storm, but for the absence of them. Caleb remained by the door, his hand still resting against the wood as if he could feel the memory of their presence lingering there. And when he finally stepped back, it was slow, measured, like a man who understood that some things did not leave just because they were no longer visible. "They saw enough," he said quietly. Ayanna did not answer right away. She moved back toward the fire, pulling the blanket aside just enough to let the light breathe again, the flame rising slightly as if it had been waiting for permission. "They saw what they came to confirm," she replied. Caleb glanced at her, then at the bead still in her hand, the cloth around her wrist, the small details that had almost betrayed them without either of them speaking a word. "And they chose to wait," he said. Ayanna nodded once, her expression steady, but her thoughts already moving ahead. "Men like that do not leave a trail unfinished," she said. The storm pressed harder against the cabin, but something in its voice had changed, the sharp edge softening just slightly, the wind no longer striking in violent bursts but settling into a long, low breath that moved across the mountain instead of through it. Caleb noticed it too. He stepped toward the window, clearing a small patch of frost, and for the first time since the storm began, there was something beyond the white. Not clear, not open, but shifting, thinning. "It is breaking," he said. Ayanna felt the words land deeper than they should have. 3 days. The storm had taken almost all of them. She stepped beside him, her gaze following his, watching the way the sky struggled to return behind the snow. "Then I leave," she said. There was no hesitation in her voice, only certainty. Caleb did not argue. He did not ask her to stay. He only nodded once, as if the decision had been made long before either of them spoke it aloud. "North Trail will be buried," he said, "but the ridge above it will hold." Ayanna turned to him, studying his face one last time in the dim light, searching for something she had not yet understood. "You will not come," she said. It was not a question. Caleb's gaze shifted back to the window, to the thinning storm, to the direction the riders had disappeared. "If I do, they follow," he answered. Simple. Final. Ayanna looked down at the bead in her hand, then slowly closed her fingers around it before stepping forward and placing it back into his palm. The movement was small, but it carried more weight than anything they had said. "This belongs with you," she said. Caleb looked at it, then at her, something unreadable passing through his eyes before it settled into quiet understanding. He did not refuse it. He did not question it. He simply closed his hand around it, as if accepting something he had never expected to receive. Ayanna reached up then, unwrapping the cloth from her wrist, revealing the red thread beneath, the one thing she had hidden, the one thing she chose to show now. She did not explain it. She did not need to. Caleb saw it, and that was enough. Outside, the storm began to lift, the white thinning into shapes, into distance, into a world that had not disappeared, only been hidden. Ayanna moved to the door, her hand resting on the latch, the same place his had been before, the same decision waiting in a different form. She paused for just a moment, not turning back, not looking at him, but aware of him in a way that did not need sight. 3 days, she said quietly. It was enough. Caleb did not answer right away. When he did, his voice was low, steady, carrying something that did not need to be named. It usually is, he said. Ayana opened the door, the cold air rushing in again. But this time it carried something else with it: space, distance, a path forward. She stepped out into it without hesitation, her figure moving into the fading storm, becoming smaller with each step until the white took her again, not as something lost, but as something returning to where it belonged. Caleb stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching until there was nothing left to see. Then he closed the door slowly, the bead still in his hand, the fire still burning behind him, and the silence settling in once more, not empty this time, but full of something that would not fade when the storm was gone.